Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. We're just going to wait a few seconds as people join. As always, this topic pulls a crowd, so we're expecting quite a few people joining us today. In the meantime, whilst we're waiting for everyone to come into the room, if you can just familiarise yourself with the layout, we will be taking questions at the end for both Nathan, Selena and I, so please do submit any questions as you go using the Q&A function. You can also use the chat function to say hello and let us know where you're joining us from today. It's pretty cold out there. Selena reliably informed me on the just as we were talking there that we're expecting decent weather at the back end of the year, back end of this week rather, but I don't know whether that's going to extend itself to the north or if she was just talking about the enclave of London, but fingers crossed we could all do with it warming up a little bit for sure. We'll wait another minute or so and then we'll get started. Still got some people coming into the lobby, but it's starting to slow down. So I think we're probably in good shape to get moving. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Giant Group and Trowers and Hamlins on the good old topic of umbrella regulations. The format for today is that we'll prepare a slide deck that we'll run through, where we can basically go through the context of the regulations, which I think everyone's starting to get familiar with the main proposals from HMRC, but also talk a little bit about what's developing in the industry and some of the points of clarification that people are seeking as we sort of move ahead towards the final legislation and then ultimately the legislation coming into effect for next April. Joining me on today's session, I'm pleased to be joined by Nathan Williams, who's a partner at Trowers and Hamlins. He'll introduce himself shortly and run through introductions, and also Selena Rabbani, who's operations director here at Giant. Agenda for today, so we've got a quick overview for any of you that have missed the overall intent of this draft legislation. So Nathan will cover the overview of that. We'll then move on to talk through the implications for both recruitment agencies, end hirers and umbrella companies. Section 3, we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the technical points where there's still some uncertainties, and then what's going on in the industry and how businesses are reacting. And then finally, we'll hand over to Selena, who will just go through a little bit about specifically what Giant are doing to prepare to give you assurance that you're in safe hands if Giant are indeed in your supply chain. And then finally, we'll finish off with Q&A. So please do use the question and answer function in the tool ribbon to put your questions through. I'll make sure that we leave a good 10 to 15 minutes or so at the end of the session to run through those questions. So a little bit about Giant. If you don't know, we're an established umbrella business. We've been operating for 35 years, managing contingent workforces on behalf of both recruitment businesses, MSPs, RPOs, and end hirers. And we've got a range of solutions that we use. Payroll is one part of that, but we're also a background checking and screening provider, as well as also delivering payroll solutions globally. So hopefully we can bring some insight to this, as well as dovetailing in neatly with Nathan on his legal opinion. So Nathan, if I hand over to you to introduce yourself and Trowers and Hamlins.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Nathan Williams. I'm one of the tax partners at Trowers. So we're a full service law firm. We have a recruitment sector cross-departmental specialism, advising recruitment businesses, so from umbrellas to the recruitment agencies and also the employer hirers, on all things IR35, employment status determinations, agency regs, supervision, direction and control, and also these new umbrella legislation changes. We have extensive experience sort of in the M&A sphere, so exiting recruitment businesses for the founders, setting up incentive schemes, and advising on the regulatory matters, whether that's tax related, such as IR35, or employment related in terms of the employment regs and everything in between. So that's a brief overview of what we cover. And as I said, there's a sector specialism in the recruitment sector here. So hopefully be able to share some knowledge and insights, having worked with Giant and rolled out many seminars like this. So if we delve straight into the detail of the legislative changes that came through and were issued earlier this year, and to be clear, they're going to be effective from 6th of April 2026. Bit of a game changer. Various governments have consulted on what has been perceived as tax avoidance and outright tax evasion by certain unscrupulous operators in the umbrella market. And various governments have tried to tackle that. And we've had a number of conducts over the years, which has led to this position. And the conclusion is that basically there is going to be a concept of joint and several liability shared within the labour supply chain for PAYE and NICs non-payment or non-compliance by the umbrella company. So that will very much depend on your supply chain. So if you're a hirer and there is no agency involved and you're contracting direct with the umbrella, and the umbrella is in default for its PAYE and NIC payments and obligations, then HMRC can go after the hirer in those circumstances. There's no statutory defence, so you can do diligence the hell out of your supply chain and think everything is fine. But if there is an unscrupulous umbrella not paying the tax when they should do, or actually a very cautious, compliant umbrella, but they just happen to get the PAYE regs wrong because they are not deducting tax from certain travel expenditure, for example, because it is complex and we see people get it wrong, not through any fault, really. It's just that complex. So it could be an innocent mistake, then that joint and several liability will fall on the end hirer. If there is an agency in the supply chain, so we have an end hirer engaging with an MSP that engages with an agency that then engages with an umbrella, then it's the agency nearest to at the top of the chain that has that joint and several liability. So if we have an end hirer engaging an agency who then engages with an umbrella, that joint and several liability falls on the agent. So again, the legislation is quite widely drafted. What applies to an umbrella worker, it is quite wide. So it's just a normal business seconding staff, its own staff into another organisation is potentially caught here, as well as traditional, more, shall we say, acknowledged supply chains involving umbrellas. There's no anti-avoidance provision within this legislation as such. There is something dealing with purported umbrella companies. So if you're trying to be clever to say, oh, actually, this is all based on an employment relationship with the individual worker and that umbrella company, and you say, well, we'll get rid of the employment relationship. We'll have some sort of quasi-worker status for employment law, but they're not an employee. Then actually there is that sort of targeted avoidance within the legislation to sort of tackle that. And don't forget, you still have the IR35 rules, which apply to intermediaries, which again is a defined term. You also have the agency rules about supervision, direction and control, and a whole raft of other legislation there. So the important thing is that because of this joint and several liability, and yes, being the lawyer in the room, you can put in whatever indemnities you like in your contracts and provisions as to awareness of supplying information. Again, it's going to come down to trust of who you're contracting with and having the visibility of what is going through your labour supply chains in terms of cash money, basically, and having that visibility. So the importance is still going to be on due diligence in your supply chain. As I said, there's no statutory defence. So even if you do DD the supply chain and there is some innocent fault at the end of that supply chain on the umbrella, again, it comes down to trust, cash flow, financial robustness of that umbrella, that they have the means to pay the tax as and when. So this is draft legislation that was published earlier this year. I think that the final legislation is expected in the autumn. And as I said, it's due to be enacted in April 2026. So if we then go on to just focusing on the implications for agencies, and Dan will pick up some of the implications for umbrella companies. It's important to note, while obviously these are implications for the agencies, these will be to a lesser extent for the end hirer as well, for the end client. Because if the agency is in the chain, then yes, the joint and several liability rests with that organization. But if that organization at some point in time falls out of the supply chain, notwithstanding that the joint and several liability could fall back on the end hirer. The end hirer will still be doing its due diligence, and it will see, best practice would dictate to maintain that due diligence in line with HMRC's published due diligence principles in terms of labour supply chains. So can't stress enough about that due diligence and that element of trust of what is going through the labour supply chains. Examples of risk where we see where this joint and several liability is going to bite an agency on its backside is if the umbrella company goes bust, goes into administration, goes into liquidation. Now, notwithstanding HMRC has certain preferred creditor positions in a formal insolvency position, it's an easy win for HMRC just to go straight after the agency if there is non-compliance or non-payment by the umbrella, because it's much more straightforward, and the legislation is done that way on purpose to allow for HMRC just to have that cause of action against somebody else other than the umbrella that may have run off into the sunset with a pot of cash, not paid any tax. So again, the onus is now falling back on others in that supply chain. So again, picking up the point that, the non-compliance or non-payment of tax may be innocent, so that the umbrella is paying expenses that should have been taxed at source but weren't. Again, that is complex. There have been a number of travel and subsistence schemes that have done the rounds over the years. We don't see many of those anymore because HMRC are wise to that, but you do see it pop up in sort of M&A transactions that are live issues ongoing with HMRC. So again, the expenses piece, and Selina will go on to sort of part of the DD exercises looking at payroll and pay slips, etc. But the risk factor is what is going through expenses and what is being reimbursed that way without tax at source. The other one is obviously the umbrella not actually calculating the tax correctly. So it's coming down to PAYE coding, making sure their RTI sort of real-time payment and reporting is up to date and that they're on top of that. So again, it comes back to the umbrella's robustness in dealing with internal admin, let alone tax compliance. And then the other extreme is outright tax evasion, that you've got a cowboy umbrella that's set up on day one, has a bunch of workers, gets the cash, shuts down, sets up again in a phoenix-like way, which, we've had many umbrella schemes that HMRC are aware of and are targeting. And the whole point of this legislation is try to crack down on that avoidance and outright evasion in some circumstances. So, the point here is that there is tax risk for the agencies and ultimately end hirers, where there is no agency, and even where there is an agency in the supply chain. So that is unfunded tax costs, because as the agency is paid gross, not expecting to deduct tax at source, the umbrella hasn't deducted tax, and all of a sudden that tax cost rests with the agency, and that needs to be funded. Again, not to do myself out of a job, you can rely on your indemnities in your contracts all you like, but they're only as good as the person standing behind those indemnities and any pot of cash that they've got, and enforcing that. And again, with these changes, we might see the market move in terms of payment structures, and we'll probably touch on that a bit later, and how the cash moves through those supply chains. But that reputational risk is quite key, particularly for those agencies and businesses operating with public sector organisations, whether that's sort of on the medic side and medical staffing side, NHS trusts, where you've got public sector contracts, that if you are somehow involved in tax avoidance schemes, and HMRC clamp down on that and you're a party to that, and even innocently, then you could be tarred with the same brush, putting your public sector contracts at risk because of those procurement rules for public sector contracts. And obviously this potential, we see this all the time in terms of the employment tax risk for recruitment businesses as part of any buy-side DD on an exit, or even on an investment where you're seeking new investment in, that this is a key area that funders and buyers will look at. And the amount of times that we see that we've got a live transaction at the moment, that we've got a massive IR35 issue, that the target has been paying individuals that happen to be non-exec directors, and there is an intermediary. So just put it into context. It's not said to scare you. This is all about risk management and obviously due diligence in your supply chain and knowing who you're dealing. And I always say with tax, just follow the money. So with that, I'll hand over to Dan, who will pick up on some of the implications for those umbrella companies.
Thanks, Nathan. That was really good. Yeah, I mean, from an umbrella company perspective, I think umbrella companies, generally speaking, are pleased with the outcome of where we're currently heading from a draft legislation perspective. You know, for those that have been following the story, it potentially we could have been in a situation where agencies were having to take responsibility for making payments directly to HMRC for tax if they were using an umbrella, which is clunky, and we'll come back round to that as a potential model on the next slide. But in essence, the HMRC have listened to the feedback from the consultation to say, yeah, you can retain using an umbrella company, and the umbrella company can remit the tax under its own employee reference number. And that's a big win for both recruitment businesses and umbrella companies, because for the large part in the compliant part of the market, the relationship between umbrella companies and recruitment agencies has been long-standing. Agencies are happy to divest the responsibility for that complex contract to payroll to umbrella companies who are happy to provide that service. So from a continuity perspective, we're in good shape. One thing I would say, though, I think in observing the market, is that what's happened over a prolonged period of time has been a lot of due diligence taking place by recruitment businesses on umbrella companies, asking for audits at a particular point in time. But on reflection, from a technology perspective, there's not been really any sort of move forward in actually how can there be a transfer of information that would support an agency knowing that an umbrella is operating compliantly on a consistent basis on that payroll week in, week out. And I think it's that gap where we've seen things like the wage slip checking technologies, which we'll talk about shortly, as well as some of the good work that Selina's been doing on the compliance portal that Giant have put together, that actually says, okay, yes, there is trust between us, but we want to be as transparent as we possibly can in sharing that information. And I think there'll be many umbrella companies looking at how they can give more information and more visibility to their recruitment partners to give that insurance on top of the basics of the due diligence checks, the requests for insurance certificates, etc. Nathan mentioned the key word for me, which is trust, because I think ultimately that's what this boils down to, and it does in any supplier relationship, is that, you know, if a recruitment agency is outsourcing payroll to an umbrella company, then they need to trust that umbrella company will do the right thing. There's only so far you can go on checks, no matter how much information ultimately is transferred. So it's the basics of a good supplier relationship that trust is there. But certainly the umbrellas that are going to win are those that are being as transparent as they possibly can be moving forward. In terms of market impact, I think it will be interesting to see how the umbrella market moves post-April of next year. Giant are already seeing that there are a number of recruitment agencies looking at reducing their PSLs where they can, but also where they run an ASL that sits alongside that PSL is actually thinking about mandating much more of the PSL moving forward. So inevitably what will happen there is that some umbrella companies will win if they're on the majority of those PSLs and some will lose. So over time, the financial strength of those smaller to mid-size umbrella companies could become more challenging if they're not winning and retaining on those PSLs. I think it's important that Nathan's highlighted here that risk can come not just from an umbrella company making a mistake or a tax calculation going wrong, but I think the bigger picture here is financial stability. If an umbrella folds without paying the money over to HMRC, then ultimately the agency or the end hirer, if there's no agency involved, are going to carry that liability. So it is super important that recruitment businesses and MSPs are paying attention to the financial stability of umbrella companies as we move through April of next year. And I think that's got to be something that's as closely watched as is, checking pay slips, is also asking for continued scrutiny on that financial position, because the market will move quick and there will be winners and losers. So if I just move forward to the next slide. So just looking now a little bit around the uncertainties and the ongoing developments that we've got, I think there are a couple of points where there's been some noise on LinkedIn with a couple of different people arguing or disagreeing as to how the legislation's shaping up. And one of the key ones I wanted to highlight is around where a recruitment business is operating PAYE. So we're waiting to see from HMRC to get clarification as to whether or not workers that are supplied under PAYE contracts are actually caught by this legislation as a purported umbrella company. There was some initial thinking that if the worker type has an impact here, so if the worker is employed, then yes, they may be caught under the new chapter of IT. But if they're a worker on a contract for service, then potentially they would not be caught by this legislation. They'd be caught under the old Chapter 7. I think this is a really important point for HMRC to clarify on, because we'd be surprised if the government were trying to catch PAYE here, because potentially, workers could then be shifted from employment contracts to worker statuses, which would result in a reduction in employment rights, which is certainly out of kilter with what they're looking at doing on the employment rights bill. There's still noise in the market as to whether or not, there is an exemption here on PAYE or not. From people that I've been speaking with over the last week or so, there's a general feeling that actually PAYE could be caught on both iterations. So we've seen FCSA have gone back to HMRC under the consultation period to try and get some clarity here, because that is super important. If we're just looking at umbrella engagement, that's one thing. If we're now actually looking at agency PAYE engagement being in scope as well, then that potentially has an impact on how people are going to reduce their liabilities. The other thing is looking at trying to get clarity where we're thinking about MSP models, in whether or not an MSP provider removes itself from the liability if they are not within the payment chain. So if an MSP is operating effectively, not moving money between the umbrella company, but is just simply deploying technology to facilitate the invoicing piece, then are they going to be caught or not? Again, we think it's likely that an MSP is going to be caught and treated as the lead agency, irrespective of whether or not they're in the payment chain. But again, it's a question that's going back to HMRC to see if we can get clarity in that final legislation. In terms of other models or solutions that are being purported in the market, there's been some comment around deemed payment models. So this is where you have a contractor engaged via a PSC, via a limited company, but they, for tax purposes, are a deemed employer, and so tax is being deducted on the basis of them being employed. And there's been some in the market that have been trying to position that, well, actually, that solution could be a way around joint and several liability because the workers, engaged by their own limited company. Again, it's another question that's going back to HMRC for clarity. But in Giant's view, we don't think that that solution would avoid joint and several liability. We'd expect that that model would be viewed as a purported umbrella under the scheme. And in fact, Giant operate and have operated this model for a number of years, our IR35 fee payer model, and that's designed to ensure that tax is paid correctly under a full PAYE engagement. So we certainly would be surprised if that was a route around the legislation. It would feel like that would be a model that would fall under that purported umbrella definition that HMRC have talked about. Selena, I don't know if you've got any other comments you want to come into then on that top section before we move through to some of these other suggestions from commentators around collective liability.
No, not really. Hi everyone. So not really. I would say that just on that last one, the deemed payment model, yeah, some do. We think it will fall under JSL. However, there are others that think, okay, but that's already dealt with under Chapter 10. And that liability, if there is failure to pay taxes, is dealt with under off payroll working rules through the third party debt transfer mechanism. So either or, we don't yet know, but we will ourselves as well be going back to HMRC to ask them for clarity on that.
Yeah, great. So yeah, moving on then just to talk about some of the other comments that we've seen from commentators. So we've got a new phrase that has come out over the last couple of weeks around collective liability. So this has been a message from Professional Passport, who've been vocal in the market over the last couple of weeks, to say that there's a potential risk here that if an agency is using an umbrella company and that umbrella company is caught under the legislation with joint and several liability, then all agencies that are engaged with that umbrella company are going to have collective liability, and that the solution to that risk is actually for the recruitment business to be doing a split payment. And Nathan touched on it when he was going through his section before. So in essence, a recruitment business would pay the tax that was due to HMRC over, and then a net payment that to be paid to the worker would then be transmitted to HMRC. Now, that in effect would have been a potential solution if option 3 under the original consultation had been rejected and an umbrella's employment reference number couldn't have been used and it needed to be done on the agency. It would be my view and Giant's view, I think, that is a complex solution. It's tricky operationally to deliver on that, because in reality, payroll needs to be ran before payments can be processed. And actually, it probably flips the risk. You could argue it flips the risk the other way around, which is you've then got a recruitment agency submitting tax to HMRC on behalf of an umbrella company, probably using an umbrella company's ERN number. So all it does is sort of switch the risk the other way around. It would seem an over complex solution if you're able to pay an umbrella company in the normal way. But I think again it comes back down to that risk point. If you and trust. So if you really don't trust the payroll company that's operating in the supply chain, then yeah, perhaps that's a way of mitigating your risk, albeit surely you'd want to challenge why you don't trust that business in the first place, and probably look to use a provider who you would trust. So it'll be interesting to see if that's got any legs. But I think ultimately, if you're looking at using an umbrella company in the normal way, doing all the due diligence that you can do, then there should be no reason to sort of look at overcomplicating the payment chain there. It also has some significant impacts in relation to cash flow as well. And as we know, many recruitment businesses do like or rely upon funding from umbrella companies to support. So again, that has an also added impact here if you're going to look to use that model. Okay, so moving through in terms of other parts where we're still seeking clarity, we wonder whether or not HMRC are going to help us a little bit in terms of HMRC portal. Selena, would you like to come in here and just talk a little bit on this point?
Yeah, so a lot of this is, well, most of this is it is all about your risk management. How does an agency or an MSP manage their risk? And we've talked about transparency. And what an agency wants to know is, has an umbrella company paid the correct PAYE and paid it all to ensure there's no shortfall? So I think it was the REC who has asked the government, are you going to be able to introduce some level of access whereby an agency will be able to have access to an umbrella company's government gateway portal, or some kind of report that comes directly from the government that says, I can tell you that all of their PAYE liabilities are up to date. So we would welcome it, because we would want there to be complete transparency. So that's one of the things that we will also be asking for clarification on, that, you know, in the up and coming developments that we see over the next 12 months, will they develop some kind of access? I don't think there will be access immediately. I do think that it takes time for HMRC to develop their system changes and money, as we know. But we will be pushing for this, and later on I'll be able to talk through the kind of level of transparency that we want to be able to give to our agency partners as well. So just going on to, I think everyone knows when the key dates. So we've got the draft legislation, final legislation, October, November, with it coming into effect from April. So, you know, what have we seen? How has the industry reacted to helping and supporting our agency partners to manage the risk? And I think it's important to understand that you can't remove the risk. There is nothing out there that is going to remove this, where you have an intermediary within your supply chain. So therefore you need to move to managing it. So Dan, you touched upon it about payslip checking software that's readily available out there in the market. Which is, it's great, it supports your due diligence. It is checking that what you're seeing on a payslip, those calculations are correct. You know, using that tax code and NI category. Is the payroll engine that the umbrella company is using, is it operating as it should be? Are those calculations correct? You'll get a tick. What the actual software isn't doing, and what you would need to do, and umbrella companies will be doing, is giving you evidence from the government gateway portals that shows that all the PAYE liabilities are up to date and it's all zero. The industry, whenever there's a legislation, there's always an opportunity for some insurance products to come into the market. So we are seeing those. We're yet to get any real firm detail on insurance products, and I do think it's because underwriters are waiting for the final legislation. You know, people say, why do you need an insurance? You've got an indemnity, but we've commented on it before that an indemnity is only as good as the party standing behind it, and if that party hasn't been able to pay their liabilities, how are they going to pay based on an indemnity? We're still to see further details on insurance products, what they cover, what they won't cover, the small print. So that'll be quite interesting once we do see the detail come out from the usual insurance providers that we see within the market. There's audits available. So you have FCSA audits that audit processes, look at pay slips. There are other audits available through the likes of SafeRec, Professional Passport. But I do think there is great value in that real-time check-in of pay slips to give you some added assurance, because what you know, previously in the market, you've always seen a manual check-in of a pay slip, an agency having to go out to an umbrella company and say, can you give me 5 random pay slips? Someone has to go away and check them. So I do think that the technology that we're seeing to support the market will make your due diligence a lot more efficient.
Thanks, Lena. Yeah, and just a couple of other points I've added in here as well, I think, just so people have got their mind on it, is, of course, Employment Rights Bill. You know, this is part of that approach from the government, but we've also got on the horizon the employment rights bill, which is bubbling away. And certainly from conversations that we've had, end hirers are increasingly concerned about the sort of risks and ultimately the costs that those employment right bill changes may bring. So certainly, they're looking at how they can outsource worker populations in light of that legislation. And off the back of IR35, there were a number of end hirers that took on contingent workforces on fixed term contracts, directly employing them or engaging them. So there could be some opportunity there actually for recruitment businesses to pick up those workers and then outsource them on to an umbrella company potentially. So there's an opportunity. I think time wise here, obviously, yes, we're waiting for the final legislations to come through, but many employment businesses are now looking at actually trying to consolidate PSLs where there's new assignments coming through, or extensions for workers, actually looking at seeing if they can consolidate the PSL now and offer the new shortened PSL out to workers, so that any movement in worker populations around April is reduced as much as possible. So take advantage of the time that you have. Don't leave everything to the last, the first quarter of next year. There's an opportunity for you to start putting in place your plan today. And the conversations that I and Selena have had with most recruitment businesses, I think generally speaking, there's a theme that if a umbrella company has an FCSA accreditation and one of the wage slip checking tools is in place, then that's acceptable. I'm sure if there's insurance that can come in and fall in off the back of that as well, then again, cost wise, and an agency will probably want to have that in its locker as well, if it's a solution that's of no cost to them. So when we do see those policies, it'll be interesting to see what the criteria are around it. From an MSP perspective, there's definitely some concern in the market, given that they would be the lead agency, as Nathan was describing, and so there's concentrated liability for an MSP for all the recruiters that operate in their supply chain. They're looking at ways where they can get better visibility to who's being engaged in that supply chain. So again, there could be some opportunity there for the wage slip checking technology to then move and look at it from an MSP perspective as well. But there are some challenges around that with worker data and the sharing of that data, and that's something that needs to be thought through, because ultimately it'd be the umbrella company or the agency that owns that worker information. So there is some data challenges around that. The other option, which is being considered by many, is how they may be able to move the recruitment agencies to a margin-only arrangement. So actually pay the recruiter for the sourcing and the search and selection, and then make a payment directly to an umbrella company that's been chosen by the worker. Now, that won't be appropriate for all MSP programs, but it could be an option to be able to control the supply chain better and actually get visibility to who is being paid down the chain from the recruitment business. So if you do supply into those MSP programs, then I'm sure you'll be keen to get some clarity on that and see how the MSPs are looking at shaping up the strategy. Okay, let's move on. And just as a quick reminder to everyone, if you've got questions, please do put them in. We'll be looking at trying to answer the questions for the last 10 minutes or so of the session. So please do submit them on the Q&A and we'll get round to them at the end. But Selena, do you just want to pick up from here and just give the audience a quick overview of what Giant are specifically doing to prepare?
Yes. So we have, since the consultation started, we've been engaged directly with HMRC, as I suppose a lot of agencies and umbrellas in the market have been. We speak with them directly. We'll be putting our feedback in terms of clarification that we require as well, and constantly doing what's right for the market. We do welcome the legislation. We think it's a good thing. Anything that stamps out non-compliance is good for us all. We, as I said earlier, we do get a lot of requests for payslips from agencies. We will always provide them, and I'll go on to show you just what we're doing to make that a bit easier and more efficient for you, so that you can check payslips and audit them. Obviously, we've been an FCSA member for many years. We work with APSCO. We've got a lot of accreditations, which I won't reel through, but those nice badges that hopefully give you some assurance that we do take things seriously. And we've got our Compliance Pro portal. So I think it comes down to this, okay? If you're a sensible agency or MSP, you're always going to take sensible and appropriate actions to protect your business. So that is doing all the right things to make sure you've carried out your due diligence. That, you know, the umbrella company, and I think I saw it in the chat, that that there's 2 points. Are you calculating taxes correctly? I think Terry Hillier said it. And are you paying the onward taxes onto HMRC? They're the two key things. What you're also then looking for is that umbrella company financially stable? Have they got the right processes in place? Not just around taxes, but also employment. There are employment processes in there, especially with the increased employment rights bills and the increased risks there. And is the umbrella company always willing to be transparent with you to make sure that you have full visibility over what is going on when it comes to the calculations and the taxes and their processes? So I think the next slide, I think, Dan. So this is just it's a demo. It's not live yet, but we are introducing a portal that will give an agency access to see some key stats and also screenshots of our government gateway portal to make sure that our liabilities are up to date. There are, you know, whether you're SafeRec, VeryPay, FCSA, there are monthly checks that those parties will also carry out with umbrella companies. So it's a live call. It's a real-time check. Please log onto your government gateway portal. I'm going to go online and do an assessment, make sure everything's up to date. So I do think it's important that you're working with umbrella companies who will always be transparent and are willing to show you their HMRC portals. There'll be a load of compliance stuff on the Compliance Pro portal. The kind of things that you're always asking for as an agency. Can I see these certificates? Can I understand your expenses policy? Can I actually see a live example of how you've processed someone's expenses? And if it has been processed as non-taxable, what evidence is there that it should have it was allowable? So these are the kind of things that you really want to be going into detail with when you're looking at compliance. And then Dan, next one. So you don't need to go through the detail here, but this is also a report that we will be giving to agencies. It's free. It's not payslip checking software, just to put it out there. This isn't checking the tax and NI calculations. You know, you can leave that to the SafeRecs and the VeryPays who will do that independently. This will give you a breakdown of the assignment income that you have sent to Giant, line by line, that income you've sent to Giant, and it breaks it down to say, oh, this was what you sent to us, this was the employer's NI, this was the app levy, this was the employer's pension, all those deductions line by line, and it will take you all the way down to a net value. And when you click into each one of those lines, you can then drill down to an individual worker level and drill down further into each individual's payslip. So you can go from a top level tax month, which is what you can see on screen, and then you will be able to drill down to an individual payslip. So this is all about giving you clarity, giving you transparency, giving you self-service access, and then, you know, your teams won't need to be asking us for pay slips. They will be there held on the portal for you. Thanks, Dan.
Great. Thanks, Lena. Yeah, like I said earlier, I think there has been a gap that's been being addressed by some of the wage slip checking technology and solutions like the portal that Lena's been with to really get information transfer on a live basis between recruitment businesses and umbrella companies. You know, the old way of just doing audits is probably no longer enough. So I think anything like that a partner can deliver in terms of giving you better visibility to live data should be welcomed. So just wrapping up then in terms of the formal presentation as such. Next steps, obviously keep yourself informed and keep monitoring for HMRC announcements around the legislation. I don't think you'll be able to move on LinkedIn without seeing it when it lands. So keep your eyes there. Giant will obviously continue to host roundtables and webinars post the announcement, and hopefully we can get some clarity on some of those uncertainties that I touched on before. It sounds obvious, but certainly I think you should be having conversations with your end hirers about these changes. I get the sense from speaking to some recruitment businesses, those conversations have not yet started with the end hirers, but I think it's important that you can assure them that you're managing that risk, either directly or, you know, on their behalf, by the sort of things that you're looking at and putting in place with your umbrella supply chain. And as I mentioned earlier, there's certainly opportunities for recruitment businesses who can sell on compliance and can who understand the legislation and can give that assurance to hirers. It should be an opportunity that you can hopefully build longer relationships, more substantial relationships there, and generate more business. So please don't be afraid of having those conversations. And if you do feel your sales team require more training around these developments and the implications, then definitely keep your staff updated and deliver that training. And if you need some support, then I'm sure Giant and Dell's sales team would be more than happy to support under those training sessions as well, to make sure that you've got the right messaging going out to your customers. So I'm just going to stop sharing at that point, and we can move through now to having a look at some of the questions that have been submitted. So just bear with me whilst I drop into the Q&A. Here we go. So we've got a few to work through. So let's just scroll down to the bottom. So question from Bill, is that what SafeRec or VeriPay does? So Bill, you asked that question 15 minutes ago. It was probably in relation to, you know, what is actually wage slip checking technology delivering here. So Selena, I don't know if you just want to quickly just give a quick scope of what the two solutions do and what the solutions don't do.
Yeah, so both solutions will check every single payroll that an umbrella company runs real time. So off the back of a payroll closing, the information, all pay slips are delivered to the software as well as the RTI files, which is submitted to HMRC. The software will check the calculations, check the tax, both employers and employees, verify that, make sure that it matches also what's been sent to HMRC on the RTR files, and then come back and say, yep, that's all good, or there is something that doesn't look quite right there, and then they will query it. So they're checking pay slips, they're checking that the calculations are done correctly. That's what the actual software does. Both parties will also check your HMRC portal, and I think someone had put something in the chat to say that, yeah, screenshots can be, you know, someone can show your portal or it might be fake. And quite rightly, yeah, it could be. And I think that's where it comes down to your trust. Would you really have an umbrella company in your supply chain who's willing, who's going to, you know, mock up a screenshot or show you a portal that isn't theirs or isn't quite right? I would hope not, but that's why I do welcome some form of technological advancement from HMRC, where they will be able to demonstrate and give access, some level of access to the portal, so an agency or whoever needs to do those checks can go in live and check that those liabilities are being paid and are up to date.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Most things can be fake these days, so it does ultimately boil down to trust. if you're going to go as far as making the payments on behalf of the umbrella, then you're not too far off just running the payroll yourself, really. I suppose that would be the argument there. Okay, so just moving on then from that point, question from Rob. If umbrella companies don't pay tax over on time, what sort of timescales would we be looking at for HMRC to come knocking on the agency door to pay it? I'll give you my view on that, and then I don't know if Selena or Nathan, if you want to chip in there. But I think in terms, there is a time lag in between payroll being run and then the actual tax being remitted to HMRC. So what we have heard in the market is, to cover that period of time, a neat solution would be for an umbrella company to provide payment terms of perhaps 2 weeks, so that particular liability period is covered. In terms of then moving on from that point in how long it would take HMRC to come round to it, I mean, that is a more open-ended conversation. I think you would have to think that it would take some time for HMRC to review that data and flag that there was an issue, by which time there could be months, dare I say years, that have passed where something wasn't necessarily being done correctly. So in the sense of when the gap between when tax is paid by the umbrella company and when it's calculated, that element of risk you could mitigate through payment terms, but it's likely to be months, certainly, before HMRC would flag there was an issue. I wouldn't expect it to happen any quicker. I don't know, Selena or Nathan, if you've got an alternative view there.
It's an interesting one, because how are HMRC going to identify that there's an umbrella company not paying its tax, for a start, because there's no HMRC registration to say you're an umbrella company? Yes, there is the registration as an employment business under the Employment Rights Bill, where you're an umbrella company, you now have to register as an employment business. But whether in terms of government, HMRC and Department of Employment or whatever it is, join those dots, I doubt it. And it's an interesting point. I don't think the direction of travel will go this way, but picking up the last point about sort of withholding tax or by the agency, you have some sort of system similar to the construction industry scheme, that you have an agency pick up the phone to HMRC, say, this is the umbrella I'm contracting with, can you please confirm their umbrella status, similar to the construction industry scheme? Say, oh yeah, they're fully verified, they're entitled to gross payment, crack on. I.e. they're trustworthy, they pay their tax on time. Or actually, no, do you know what? Last 2 months they've been late in paying their national insurance or PAYE or VAT, and therefore you deduct tax at 20% or whatever it is. And you sort of think, and again, it'd be interesting one for you, Dan and Selena, whether any sort of similar process or system was put in place as part of the condoc. I'm not aware of that, and I'm aware that HMRC sort of do crawl over the construction industry scheme, so I'm not saying it solves all these issues, but again, it's from HMRC's perspective, it's at what point is the system going to raise a red flag that somebody's not paying their tax when they should do, and then have the visibility to say, oh, there's a contract with another agency and therefore we can go after them. Because again, there's no disclosure to HMRC in terms of the contractual arrangements. It's just then a fishing exercise by HMRC to gather that info and go after the relevant end hirer or agency in that supply chain. And it's going to be quite difficult in practice if it is a unscrupulous umbrella that's done a flit. How are they going to get that information? And we have seen HMRC sort of spray and pray and gone to recruitment businesses where they have had, mainly aimed at VAT fraud, but again in supply chains, done a phishing exercise to request information from agencies, but without disclosing the umbrella that they're dealing with. So from an agency perspective, you go, well, we can't confirm or deny it until you tell us who you're talking about. It's slightly bonkers, but I can see the similar issues coming through with this because HMRC won't have full visibility.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. It's like you say, generally speaking, HMRC Not that they won't want to move quickly, but often they can't, given the amount of information that's flowing through. So there's going to be a lag effect there, and that is going to increase a liability if something isn't going correct. Let's just keep going through the questions. Moving on, I think there's a quick one we can answer here. So another question from Bill. What will be the implications for a business who have a direct contract with umbrellas, but no agency involved at all? Will they be joint and severally liable on that basis as the end user? An internal recruitment team in a wider non-agency business? So I think the simple answer to that one is yes. If there is no separate entity of an agency involved, then that end hirer, doesn't matter whether it's a recruitment business as part of that end hirer, it's part of the same group, would ultimately have joint and several liability along with the umbrella company. I suppose the only way to remove that joint and several liability would be to have a third-party entity, another recruitment business external from that group in that supply chain. But that will kind of defeat the reason why you've set up your own internal recruitment business, basically. So I think that's an easy one to answer. Let's carry on going through. Question from Gordon. Can you confirm if the word joint in joint several liability means the umbrella and agency sharing liability? Everything points towards it not being joint at all and it all being on the agency. So what does joint mean? Nathan, do you want to pick up that?
Joint and several liability is sort of a legal term. Let's just take a step back. So the umbrella is the employer. So the primary obligation under the PAYE regs and NICs is that the employer has to deduct tax at source and pay that over to HMRC. So they're the tax collecting agent rather than the employee themselves. But the tax liability is the employees. So part of the issues with umbrellas is that HMRC have seen, well, this is unfair to the end workers that they haven't had visibility as to what tax or not has been deducted. So they're quite innocent in HMRC's eyes. So they just get paid without any idea of what tax should have been deducted. So it's the employee's tax liability. So the whole point of these rules is to take it away from the employees, because these are a load of temporary workers who just get paid at the end of the day with no visibility as what's being deducted at source. And that there is tax leakage in that supply chain. The concept of joint and several liability is that, well, primarily the obligation is on the umbrella to account for that tax. That is their obligation. What this legislation does is say, well, that obligation is now shared jointly and severally with the agent, or if there is no agency, with the end hirer. What that means is that that obligation also now rests with that agency. And it's joint. If it was several, so the concept of several liability is that each party is only liable for their share of the obligation. So if me and my partner owe a debt 50-50, and that is several liability, then if my partner defaults on the 50, I am still only liable for my share of the 50. They can't go after the 100 if we both default. They could only go after me for the 50. If it's joint and several, that debt is 100. Then even if I pay my 50 and my partner doesn't pay his or hers, then they can come after me for the other 50, because that 100 is shared between us. So that's what joint and several liability means, is that you share that obligation equally between yourselves. So if one defaults, the whole liability goes to the other.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're just coming up to time now. There are a couple of other questions left, so we'll review those, and potentially on the follow-up where we'll share the recording, we'll look to address the remaining questions. Nathan, thank you very much for joining us and covering there. We really appreciate it. Selena, thank you as well for running us through your sections on what Giant are looking to do. We'll obviously keep the series going of webinars as things continue to develop. So stay tuned to that. And for the rest of the day, have a great afternoon, and let's look forward to some warmer weather. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.